the space where all the action is happening, and literally hundreds of volunteers have gathered at the conference center out at Century City. And of course, we're doing very, very important stuff. It is Nelson Mandela Day today, and we're doing our little 67 minutes to feed a nation, to pack hope with food forward South Africa this Mandela Day. And in the second hour, we're going to talk a lot about what's happening over here, but our regular interaction with our colleagues at Deutsche Welle Berlin will happen in a short while, and Arthur Sullivan is standing by on that side in Berlin to bring us the latest news from Europe. And then we're going to home a hound. I'm going to introduce you to Clever Trevor, and then we'll focus in the second half of this hour on the initiative playing out at this moment in time with Andy du Plessis, the MD of Food Forward South Africa. That's Views and News, our second hour, and you're welcome.
Views and News with Clarence Ford.
We all have a voice.
Use yours.
Call 021 446 0567.
Join the conversation
on Cape Talk.
And yes, of course, you can WhatsApp us, be part of the conversation via WhatsApp at 072 567 1567 or call 021 446 0567. We'll prioritize your call on that telephone number. It's a regular interaction that we have with our colleagues at Deutsche Welle Berlin every Friday, just after 10 o'clock. It's time to cross there. Germany, to look at what's happening in Europe. Now, German prosecutors have charged a 68-year-old man suspected of drugging and raping 14 women he met on an online dating platform. And he filmed these attacks as well. The case has drawn comparisons, of course, with that high-profile case of French woman Gisèle Pelicot. And Arthur joins us via Zoom. What are the main details of this case? Arthur, welcome.
Hi, Clarence. Yeah, good to be with you. So this case, the investigation into this case began about a year and a few months ago. And this 68-year-old suspect, right here in the German capital in Berlin, had appeared on online chat logs with another man whom authorities were investigating separately. So they were investigating this other guy, and then they saw he was chatting with another guy about the same issue, which was the drugging and raping of women. Now, the other man has since died. But this new investigation gathered momentum, and recently the home of this new suspect was searched, devices were found, and on these devices they were found to contain footage of multiple sexual offences and rapes. Now, this week the case developed significantly. Prosecutors charged this man, this 68-year-old man who's an electrician in the Berlin area, with 22 counts of aggravated rape involving 14 different women. Now, the total figure of victims is believed to be much higher, possibly as many as 58 women suspected to have been raped, but not all cases have proceeded yet because there's still investigations ongoing. Some of them have not been identified. Now, this man is suspected of drugging the victims and then filming the attacks and the rapes. He's been in detention since March. He's made no comment, and it's now up to the courts in Berlin to proceed with the case. So the suspicion here is that he met the women online, drugged them, and raped them and recorded the attacks. Now, the thing is, none of the women who've been contacted so far had any recollection of being raped, and they only found out when they were shown the videos that were retrieved by investigators. So in that sense, quite similar to the Pelicot case in France.
Indeed, and we've drawn reference and comparisons with that Pelicot case in France. And, of course, now Germany, it's a high-profile mass rape case involving victims being drugged, isn't it? Let us just understand that completely.
Yes, it is indeed, and it's not actually the first one, Clarence, that we've had in Germany recently. So like with this Pelicot case, we're now seeing a trend emerging of these types of cases. So that extraordinary Gisèle Pelicot case, I'm sure many of your listeners are very familiar with it. French woman who was drugged by her own husband and raped by him and dozens of other men while she was unconscious, all unbeknownst to her until the investigation gathered steam. That drew attention to these cases where victims are drugged, and some of the methods used involving drugging them with sleeping pills or plying them with alcohol or mixing different drugs. So recently in Berlin, just a week ago in fact, there was a 32-year-old Chinese doctor who was sentenced to 5 years in jail for a very similar case. And he was part of a wider investigation into a Telegram group involving several other people who, it was the so-called German driving school group. That was the name of this group they had on Telegram, where they were sharing information about different sedatives that could be used, different types of drugs that could be used. This doctor, in fact, was using his medical expertise to provide information to other men about how they could carry out these crimes. And several men in that group have now been convicted. And there's even a wider backdrop of these cases in Europe now, Clarence. Earlier this month, investigators in the UK said that they had discovered an international network of organised drug-facilitated sexual assault in which victims are being raped, sexually assaulted, unbeknownst to them. Separately, Europol, so that's the across Europe, various police forces working together. They're working on a separate investigation, working to identify more than 150 victims of drug-facilitated sexual assault in several different countries. And the big thing with these cases, Clarence, is that it shows there's no boundaries, no distinction between class, between occupation, between creed when it comes to the perpetrators and indeed the victims of rape. There are simply victims and perpetrators, and what's perhaps most shocking about this is it's becoming quite public. These perpetrators are perfectly happy to share details of their crimes and indeed share information and, as they would see it, advice about how to commit these crimes in groups with other perpetrators.
And I guess where is public sentiment on this matter? I'm sure there's a major outcry in Germany, maybe a debate around rape and maybe the laws related to it?
Well, what we saw with the Pelicot case was that became a huge global story. It made Gisèle Pelicot a global feminist icon. And while this case has made headlines in Germany, it hasn't been a huge story so far, certainly nothing comparable to the Pelicot case. And in some respects, that's because it hasn't proceeded fully yet. It hasn't got to the point where there's actual court action, although that should be coming soon. But there are some distinctions here we should make with Germany. I mean, Germany is extremely protective of the identity of both victims and indeed perpetrators of crimes. It's quite rare that perpetrators are named even after prosecution in Germany. Their rights to privacy are often very strongly protected. So there isn't really a culture in Germany, perhaps it's not a good thing, but that's how it is, of perpetrators being actually publicly named. And so you're unlikely to see a figure like Pelicot emerging in this case, although who's to say how it will develop. But when one examines the case closely, it does shine a light on some of the issues with German law and indeed the law in other jurisdictions when it comes to prosecuting rape cases. So just very quickly, for example, even though 58 women are suspected of being victims of the man in this case, not all of them have been identified yet. Maybe they won't all be identified because the nature of the crimes makes it actually harder to identify some of the women when they didn't even know themselves they were attacked. But then there's also an issue around the statute of limitations. So, for example, in Germany, if cases are not deemed to involve the use of force, there's only a 5-year statute of limitations, which in one of the cases here means that the case won't proceed. Now, that's a hard one to get your head around because the act of rape itself inherently involves force. So it's difficult to figure that one out. But unfortunately, cases of rape in Germany are often not prosecuted because of this 5-year statute of limitations. There's also another issue used around how drugs used to sedate victims are designated. Are they designated as, quote, dangerous items in the context of sexual assault? So, for example, if someone attacks you and uses a knife or a gun, that's a dangerous item. Unfortunately, in German law, a date rape drug, is not a dangerous item. And that means that, again, a lesser sentence may come about as a result of a case like that. So lots of issues like that around the prosecution of these crimes, and yet again shining a light on how difficult it can be sometimes for the victims of rape to actually get justice.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, a big thank you, big conversation out in in Berlin today, and I would imagine all over Germany, another rape case making the headlines out of Europe. It is exactly 10:15. It is time for us to home a hound, and of course an initiative with the SPCA, the Cape of Good Hope SPCA, and